The first sign that something was wrong didn't come with shouting or anger. It came quietly, disguised as care. My husband started asking questions he had never cared about before. How much is left in your account? Did you ever update the house papers? Who's your beneficiary, by the way? At first, I answered without thinking. We had been married for 11 years. Trust was supposed to be automatic. But something in his tone felt rehearsed, too careful, too interested. I noticed other things too. He began coming home later than usual, always with a ready-made excuse. Work meetings, traffic, a tired smile that never reached his eyes. One evening, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. It wasn't from a restaurant or store near his office. It was from a hotel across town. My hands trembled slightly as I stared at it. I told myself not to assume, not to jump to conclusions. That's what good wives do. They give the benefit of the doubt until there's nothing left to give. That night, he wrapped an arm around me in bed and fell asleep within minutes. I lay awake, listening to his breathing, realizing how unfamiliar it suddenly felt. The next morning, he was unusually affectionate. He made breakfast, kissed my forehead, and said, "We should plan our future better, be smart about things." That word stayed with me all day. Smart. By the afternoon, curiosity had turned into something heavier. Instinct. I opened our shared laptop, not looking for betrayal, just clarity. I didn't have to search long. Emails, drafts, conversations half deleted but not fully erased. My name appeared again and again, next to words like transfer, ownership, authorization. My chest tightened. This wasn't about love. It was about preparation. When he came home that evening, he talked excitedly about an investment opportunity, something about securing us and long-term stability. He slid a folder across the table after dinner. "Nothing urgent," he said lightly. "Just paperwork. We'll go through it together." I opened it slowly. Inside were documents that would quietly move everything I owned, the house, the savings, even my inheritance, into structures I barely recognized, all under the word temporary. I looked up at him. He was smiling, calm, confident. And that's when I understood something terrifying. He wasn't afraid I would say no. He was counting on me not noticing at all. I closed the folder gently and said the words he expected to hear. "Okay, we'll talk about it tomorrow." He relaxed instantly. But inside me, something had already shifted. I didn't know yet how this would end. I only knew one thing for certain. I would not be the surprise in that night after he fell asleep. I went back to the dining table and opened the folder again. This time, I read every page slowly, carefully, the way you read something that could change your life forever. The language was complicated on purpose. Long sentences, soft words, promises hidden behind legal terms, but the meaning was clear enough. Once signed, control would quietly leave my hands. I felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, anger, disbelief, but beneath all of it, something steady began to form. Awareness. And awareness has a way of sharpening you. The next day, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I didn't feel ill, but I needed time. Time to think without pretending. Time to listen to my instincts instead of silencing them. I started with small things. Bank statements, old emails, financial records I had never paid attention to because I trusted him to handle the boring stuff. Patterns began to emerge. Transfers I didn't remember approving, accounts I didn't recognize, conversations that ended just before they should have. By the afternoon, my hands were no longer shaking. I felt calm in a way that surprised me. That calm scared me more than panic ever could. When he came home, he asked if I was feeling better. His voice was gentle, practiced. "I am," I said, and for the first time, it was true. Over dinner, he spoke That night, after he fell asleep, I went back to the dining table and opened the folder again. This time, I read every page slowly, carefully, the way you read something that could change your life forever. The language was complicated on purpose, long sentences, soft words, promises hidden behind legal terms, but the meaning was clear enough. Once signed, control would quietly leave my hands. I felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, anger, disbelief, but beneath all of it, something steady began to form: awareness. And awareness has a way of sharpening you. The next day, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I didn't feel ill, but I needed time. Time to think without pretending. Time to listen to my instincts instead of silencing them. I started with small things: bank statements, old emails, financial records I had never paid attention to because I trusted him to handle the boring stuff. Patterns began to emerge. Transfers I didn't remember approving, accounts I didn't recognize, conversations that ended just before they should have. By the afternoon, my hands were no longer shaking. I felt calm in a way that surprised me. That calm scared me more than panic ever could. When he came home, he asked if I was feeling better. His voice was gentle, practiced. "I am," I said, and for the first time, it was true. Over dinner, he spoke confidently about our future, about downsizing, about simplifying life, about how couples our age needed to be practical. He reached for my hand across the table. "You trust me, right?" he asked casually. I met his eyes and nodded. "Of course." The relief on his face was instant. He squeezed my hand, unaware that my trust had quietly transformed into observation. That night, as he showered, his phone lit up on the nightstand. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. A name flashed across the screen, unfamiliar but somehow obvious. I turned away before temptation could turn into regret. Some truths announce themselves without words. Over the next few days, I watched him more closely than I ever had before. The way he angled his phone away from me, the way his stories had too many details or not enough, the way he checked the mailbox before I could. Once, I asked him casually if he had changed the passwords to our accounts. He laughed. Too quickly. He said, "You'll worry too much. I'm handling everything." That sentence settled heavily in my chest. Handling everything. By the end of the week, I made a decision I never imagined I would have to make. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't tell my family. I told a lawyer. Sitting in that quiet office, explaining my situation to a stranger felt surreal. But as I spoke, the confusion untangled itself into facts. The lawyer listened carefully. Then she looked at me and said something I will never forget. "You're not paranoid," she said. "You're early." Early. For the first time in days, I breathed freely. She explained my options calmly, professionally, what I could protect, what I needed to do immediately, what mistakes not to make. "Do nothing obvious," she warned. "Let him believe he's ahead." When I left her office, the world outside looked the same. Cars passing, people rushing, life continuing, but I was not the same person who had walked in. That evening, my husband kissed me on the cheek and asked if I had thought more about the papers. "Yes," I said, softly. "I have." He smiled. He had no idea how true that was. And as I lay awake that night, listening to the familiar rhythm of his breathing, I realized something else. The most dangerous moment in a lie is when the liar feels safe. And he had never felt safer than he did right. He had never felt safer than he did right now. And that safety made him careless. The next morning, he left his laptop open on the kitchen counter as he rushed out the door, already late for work. He kissed my cheek quickly, told me he'd call later, and disappeared before I could say a word. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the screen. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't spying. I was finally paying attention. The email was already open, a draft, unsent. My name appeared in the subject line, followed by words that made my stomach tighten. After she signs. I scrolled slowly, my heart pounding, my breathing shallow. The message was addressed to the same unfamiliar name I had seen on his phone days earlier. The tone was casual, confident, as if the outcome was guaranteed. He wrote about timelines, about moving funds, about how she won't suspect a thing. She. 11 years of marriage reduced to a pronoun. I closed the laptop carefully, exactly the way I had found it. My hands were steady now. That surprised me. Somewhere along the way, fear had transformed into something colder and far more useful. Clarity. That afternoon, I followed my lawyer's advice and did nothing that would raise suspicion. I answered his messages, I sent him a photo of dinner, I told him about my day. I played the role he expected, the trusting wife, slightly distracted, safely predictable. Inside, I was mapping everything. That evening, he came home energized, almost cheerful. He talked quickly, words tumbling over each other, as if excitement had loosened his restraint. "Good news," he said. "The process is moving faster than expected." I nodded. "That's great." He didn't notice how carefully I chose my tone, how neutral I kept my expression. He poured himself a drink and relaxed into the couch, confidence radiating from him. "You know," he said casually, "once all this is settled, we'll finally be free. No stress, no complications." Free. I wondered who he thought would be free. Over the next few days, I began making quiet preparations of my own, copies of documents, screenshots, timelines. I didn't confront him, I didn't accuse him. I collected. One evening while we were watching television, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, hesitated, then stepped outside to take the call. I muted the TV and listened. His voice was low, urgent. The walls were thin. I didn't need to hear every word to understand the tone, reassuring, intimate, familiar in a way that didn't belong to me anymore. When he came back inside, he avoided my eyes. "Work," he said quickly. I smiled faintly. "Of course." That night, as he slept, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the woman I had been before all this, the woman who believed love was protection enough, the woman who thought betrayal announced itself loudly. I understood now how wrong that was. Betrayal whispers, it plans, it waits. The next morning, my lawyer called. "We need to move one step sooner than planned. There's activity we didn't expect." My pulse quickened. "Is it bad?" "It's risky," she replied carefully, "but manageable, if you stay calm." I looked across the room at my husband, humming to himself as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. So confident, so unaware. "I can stay calm," I said. After the call ended, I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I stared at my reflection, searching for the fear I expected to see. It wasn't there. Instead, I saw resolve. Whatever he thought he was building behind my back, I was already standing inside the blueprint. And the foundation he was relying on, my silence, my trust, my loyalty, was about to disappear. Quietly. Just like he planned. The next few days passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost insulting. He laughed more, whistled around the house, even suggested inviting friends over for dinner, as if celebration was already in order. I watched him closely, noticing how light he seemed, how unburdened, as if a weight had already lifted from his shoulders. Mine felt heavier than ever. I followed my lawyer's instructions precisely. I didn't rush, I didn't panic. Every step had to be invisible. We began by securing what could still be secured: accounts in my name only, documents that proved timelines, digital trails that couldn't be erased as easily as he believed. Each night I went to bed beside him, listening to him talk about plans he no longer intended to share with me. He spoke of travel, of starting fresh, of how change was good for relationships. I wondered if he believed his own words. One afternoon I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I heard voices upstairs. His voice and hers. I froze at the bottom of the stairs, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I didn't go up. I didn't announce myself. I listened. They spoke in fragments, sentences overlapping, confidence thick in the air. They talked about timelines again, about patience, about how soon everything would be settled. "She trusts you," the woman said. He laughed softly. "She always has." I stepped back slowly, my legs weak but my mind sharp. That was the moment grief finally arrived, not as tears, but as a deep, hollow ache, the kind that settles into your chest and changes how you breathe. When I left the house, I didn't drive far. I parked a few streets away and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, forcing myself to stay present. I wasn't allowed to break yet, not now. That evening, I returned home as if nothing had happened. He greeted me with a kiss and asked about my day. I answered easily, convincingly. He had no idea how close I had come to the truth, or how firmly I had stepped back into my role. Later that night, he handed me the folder again. "We should finalize this," he said gently. "No more delays." I opened it, pretending to review the pages for the first time. I nodded slowly. "You're right, it's time." The relief on his face was unmistakable. He thought the end was near. What he didn't know was that signing those papers wouldn't end anything. It would begin it. The next morning I dressed carefully, neutral colors, calm expression, no visible hesitation. I signed exactly where he pointed, exactly how he wanted. He watched my hand move across the page with barely contained excitement. "There," he said softly, "it wasn't so hard, was it?" I smiled faintly. "No." Inside, I counted every breath. We mailed the documents together. He insisted on dropping them off himself, as if proximity could speed victory. When he returned, he hugged me tightly. "Thank you for trusting me," he whispered. I didn't respond. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my lawyer. "It's done," she said. "Now we wait." I looked out the window at the street below, at people living ordinary lives, unaware of the quiet war unfolding behind closed doors. "How long?" I asked. "Not long," she replied, "and when it happens, everything changes." That night, as my husband slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, fully aware that he believed the story was ending. He was wrong. The story was only just learning how to speak. I waited a few days, carefully watching, listening. Every detail mattered. Every pattern, every casual phrase, every pause. Hello, viewers. Have you ever sensed that someone was hiding something right in front of you, or that a situation seemed normal, but you just knew it wasn't? Think about that for a moment. Maybe something similar has happened to you. Maybe you're experiencing it even now. Comment below where you are watching from and tell me how you would feel in this situation. That morning, he left a note on the kitchen counter, claiming he had to run an unexpected errand. The excitement in his tone was evident. He thought the next step in his plan would go unnoticed, invisible to me. I brewed coffee slowly, savoring each sip. It felt good to move calmly while the storm quietly approached. The folder lay open on the dining table, signed, complete, yet meaningless now. He didn't know that the careful steps I had taken were silently undermining every move he thought he controlled. Later, I retrieved a set of documents I had prepared, backups of everything, financial records, proofs, and copies of his emails. I organized them meticulously, ensuring that nothing could be altered or erased without leaving evidence. When he returned home, his confidence radiated like sunlight, oblivious to the fact that I now held the map of every step he had taken. "Everything went perfectly today," he said casually. "We're on track." I nodded, maintaining my calm exterior. Inside, I felt a quiet, powerful satisfaction. I realized that the most dangerous part of any plan isn't the execution, it's underestimating the person you think is vulnerable. That night, I lay in bed, the documents safely hidden away, and considered my next steps. The story had shifted, and now it was fully awake. The next morning, the house seemed unusually quiet. He was gone earlier than usual, leaving behind an air of satisfaction as if he had already won the game he had started. I moved through the rooms deliberately, noting every detail. Lights left on, chairs slightly moved, the faint scent of his cologne lingering where he had passed. Every little sign was a piece of the puzzle. I reviewed the copies of all the important documents again, making sure everything was in order. Every account, every email, every transfer, all accounted for. There would be no surprises this time. By afternoon, I noticed subtle changes in his patterns, slight hesitation in his phone calls, a pause when mentioning certain names, small cracks in the confidence he wore so comfortably. I smiled to myself. Patience had a way of revealing truth. That evening, he came home excited about a meeting he had attended. He recounted the details with pride, thinking he was cleverly advancing his plan. I listened, nodding along, while mentally noting every inconsistency, every exaggeration. Later, as he prepared dinner, I quietly set aside a folder with the final evidence. Everything he thought he could hide, now documented, safe, and undeniable. I realized then that the power dynamic had quietly shifted. He thought he was in control, but the foundation he had relied on, my silence and trust, no longer existed. Night fell, and he spoke softly as he fell asleep beside me, unaware that the story had already taken a turn he could never anticipate. For the first time in weeks, I felt a calm certainty. I wasn't just surviving this situation, I was guiding it. The next morning, he left for work earlier than usual, giving me the perfect opportunity to check the progress of my plan. I reviewed the accounts, cross-checked every transfer, and verified that the documents were perfectly aligned to prevent any sudden surprises. Each step he thought was his advantage was now being carefully monitored. Every move he made gave me information, without him ever suspecting. I noticed small things that day: a missed email, a delayed response, a hesitation in his usual confident tone. They were subtle, almost imperceptible, but to me they were as loud as alarms. By evening he returned, more confident than ever, carrying the air of someone who believed he had already won. He laughed and recounted trivial stories from his day, unaware that I had already anticipated every word. I nodded and smiled, keeping my voice calm and neutral. Inside, I catalogued every detail, every expression, every gesture, every tone. Later, I prepared the next stage. Everything needed to be ready for the moment when the plan shifted from observation to action. I couldn't rush. Patience was key. The more he thought he was in control, the more predictable his moves became. As night fell, I watched him asleep beside me, still blissfully unaware of the storm quietly gathering in my mind. I had learned something vital. Power isn't taken in a single strike. It's collected quietly, piece by piece, while the other person believes they are leading the way. Tomorrow would bring the next step, and The following morning, the sun rose bright and clear, casting light across the house that had been the stage of so many subtle battles. He left for work as usual, chatting briefly about plans for the week, still convinced nothing had shifted. I moved silently through the house, reviewing every piece of evidence and double-checking my preparations. Each file, each copy, each detail had to be precise. There could be no mistakes. By midday, I began the first part of my quiet maneuver. Small transfers were made, funds secured, and key information duplicated in ways he could never detect. Every move reinforced my control while keeping him completely unaware. Later, I overheard a conversation he was having on the phone, his voice sharp and commanding. He was trying to manipulate someone else in his plan, oblivious that I had already anticipated every word and every strategy. I smiled faintly, realizing how predictably confident he had become. Confidence is a dangerous tool when wielded without knowledge. That evening, he returned home, proud and triumphant, talking about meetings and negotiations. I responded with calm, measured words, never betraying the quiet storm I had built. As night fell, I prepared the next stage. Everything had to be perfect: timing, placement, and execution. One small mistake could reveal the strategy, and I could not allow that. I lay in bed, listening to his steady breathing, and thought about the irony of it all. He believed he was planning my downfall, when in reality, every step he took was bringing me closer to the outcome I had envisioned. And in that quiet, unassuming night, I felt it. The balance of power had shifted. The next morning, I began implementing the second phase of my plan. Every move was deliberate, calculated, and silent. Documents were sent, accounts verified, and backups stored in multiple locations, invisible to him, yet fully within my control. By afternoon, I observed his usual patterns: the confident way he spoke to colleagues on the phone, the manner in which he organized meetings, the subtle gestures of control he assumed over every situation. All of it predictable, all of it mine to study. That evening, he returned home, slightly weary but still carrying the confidence of someone who believes the game is theirs to win. I greeted him with calm words and a gentle smile, carefully maintaining the facade of normalcy. I cooked dinner while quietly reviewing the final sequences of my plan in my mind. Each step would be executed at the perfect time. Timing was crucial. Haste would ruin the entire strategy. Later, while he watched television, I made sure all the evidence, all the necessary documentation, and all copies were perfectly organized. Nothing could go missing. Nothing could be altered. Night fell, and he spoke casually about upcoming meetings and obligations. His tone was light, unaware that the true weight of control had quietly shifted into my hands. I lay awake, listening to him breathing, and realized that patience, observation, and careful preparation had turned what could have been a nightmare into an opportunity. Power is quiet. Power is subtle. And by the end of this, it would be absolute. The next morning, I awoke early, while the house was still wrapped in silence. I prepared my notes and reviewed the final steps once more, ensuring that every move, every action, and every precaution had been accounted for. He left for work, whistling softly, completely unaware that his carefully constructed plans were being quietly dismantled, piece by piece, in the background. I began coordinating the final sequence. Documents were duplicated, evidence secured, and every potential loophole covered. Each step was deliberate, invisible, yet inevitable. By noon, subtle cracks in his routine began to appear. A delayed reply here, a distracted glance there. Small inconsistencies that revealed how overconfident he had become. I smiled faintly. Confidence is a dangerous thing when paired with ignorance. Later that afternoon, I reviewed every account, every email, every piece of communication he had ever relied upon. The more I studied, the more I realized how completely predictable his patterns had become. Evenings in our house had taken on a strange rhythm. He was oblivious to my quiet dominance, while I moved through the space like someone who owned not just the house, but the narrative itself. As night fell, I placed the final copies in a secure location. One by one, the pieces were in place. The plan that had taken weeks of careful observation and preparation was finally ready for the execution phase. I lay in bed, my mind racing with every potential outcome. He slept beside me, completely at ease, still unaware that the story had turned. By tomorrow, nothing would be as he expected, and for the first time, I felt the exhilarating. The following morning, I prepared meticulously. Every document, every copy, every account detail had been triple-checked. I knew exactly what had to be done and when. He left for work, confident and unaware. I followed my carefully laid-out routine, performing ordinary tasks while mentally rehearsing the steps I would take. By mid-afternoon, subtle signs confirmed my observations from the previous days. He had grown careless in his communication, a misphrased email, a delayed response, tiny oversights that confirmed my advantage. I smiled faintly, knowing these small errors would compound when the right moment arrived. That evening, he returned home, animated from work. He recounted conversations, decisions, and plans with a confidence that was now almost naive. I listened carefully, nodding and responding just enough to maintain the illusion of normalcy. After dinner, I excused myself under the pretense of preparing tomorrow's schedule. I went to the study and carefully arranged all the documents in the exact order needed for the final stage. Each folder, each copy, each piece of evidence was aligned perfectly. He passed by, humming, unaware of the quiet storm I had created behind the scenes. Later that night, I lay in bed, reviewing every detail in my mind. The pieces were aligned, the sequence clear, and the endgame ready. The power had shifted. He believed he was winning, but in reality, he had walked straight into the plan I had orchestrated over weeks of observation and careful preparation. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning light streamed through the curtains as I quietly reviewed the final steps one last time. Each folder, each copy, each bit of evidence was perfectly arranged, every contingency accounted for. He left for work as usual, whistling, confident that the house and everything in it was still entirely under his control. I moved methodically through the rooms, checking each item, double-checking the backups, ensuring nothing could be altered or hidden. Every detail mattered. By mid-afternoon, I began discreetly sending key documents to secure accounts, copies tucked safely where only I could access them. Each transfer was silent, undetectable, and irreversible. Later, I noticed a small hesitation in one of his emails, a tone he had not used before, the first real crack in his confidence. I smiled faintly. Patience had paid off, observation had done its work. When he returned that evening, he was unaware of how much had changed without him noticing. His casual confidence was now irrelevant. Dinner was ordinary, conversation was light. I asked questions, smiled, and maintained an appearance of calm. He remained oblivious. After he went to bed, I prepared the final folder, the culmination of every step I had planned, all evidence secured, all accounts copied, all proof undeniable. For the first time, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. The stage was set, the plan was complete, and as I lay awake listening to his slow, steady breathing, I knew one truth. He had never realized he was playing my game all along. The next morning, I moved deliberately but silently, ensuring everything was in place before he even left the house. Every document, every backup, every detail had been reviewed one final time. He left for work, confident as ever, believing his carefully crafted plans were unstoppable. I followed my routine, quietly reviewing the sequence in my mind. Timing was everything. By afternoon, I noticed subtle changes in his patterns. The overconfidence that had carried him for weeks was beginning to show cracks. A misstep in an email, a delayed response, and a fleeting hesitation in his voice when speaking to a colleague. I smiled. These small inconsistencies were all the confirmation I needed. That evening, he returned home, tired but still carrying the same misplaced confidence. I greeted him politely, maintaining the facade of normalcy, as if nothing had changed. Later, I prepared the final sequence. The documents, evidence, and digital proof were organized, each file in its proper order. Every move I had made, every precaution I had taken would culminate in the coming days. Night fell, and I lay awake, listening to his soft, steady breathing. He was unaware that his plan was about to be undone. The game had shifted. The power that he thought was his alone had quietly moved into my hands, and soon he would see what patience, observation, and careful strategy could accomplish. The following morning, I went about my routine with deliberate calm. Every move, every step, every action was measured. I had learned that control was not in force, but in precision and timing. He left for work, unaware that the momentum of the past weeks had quietly shifted the balance of power. Each of his assumptions about my ignorance, about my passivity, had been dismantled silently. By mid-afternoon, I reviewed everything one last time. Every document, every piece of evidence, every digital backup, perfectly aligned and prepared for the final execution. I checked the accounts. Everything was secure. I could act without warning, without hesitation. When he returned home, he was cheerful, recounting trivial victories from his day, still believing he held control. I listened carefully, responding just enough to maintain the illusion. Later, I organized the final files, every folder, every copy, every backup, meticulously prepared. My heart was calm, my mind sharp. Every step I had taken over weeks, every observation, every preparation led to this moment. As night fell, I lay awake beside him, the quiet rhythm of his breathing filling the room. He believed the story was ending, that his dominance was unchallenged. He was wrong. The story had matured, and tomorrow the consequences of his overconfidence would become undeniable. The next morning, everything was ready. Every document, every backup, every detail perfectly aligned. The stage had been set, and the moment for action had arrived. He left for work, blissfully unaware that the balance of power had already shifted. His overconfidence had made him predictable, and predictability had been my greatest advantage. I moved with deliberate calm, executing the final steps. Emails were sent, accounts secured, and evidence filed in ways that would leave no room for denial. Each move was precise, invisible, and irreversible. By afternoon, I confirmed that every step had succeeded exactly as planned. Nothing could be altered, nothing could be undone. The outcome was now entirely under my control. When he returned home that evening, he was cheerful, oblivious to the storm that had quietly formed around him. I greeted him calmly, maintaining the perfect facade of normalcy. That night, as he slept, I reviewed everything one last time. The documents, the backups, the proof of every manipulation and every misstep he had made. The story that had once been controlled by his lies was now fully mine. I realized then, lying beside him in the dark, that patience, observation, and careful strategy were more powerful than any betrayal. The story had finally reached its conclusion, and I had won, silently, decisively, and completely.